Michael Thornton slammed the stack of documents onto his desk, his face a picture of tension. The vast office around him felt like a fortress, but the silence was so heavy that all he could hear was the ticking of the wall clock. The numbers on the report before him were all wrong. They didn't add up. Michael leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples, trying to piece together the fragments in his mind. Suddenly, he remembered the anonymous letter he had found on his desk just days earlier. The numbers have been falsified, the letter had stated, with such meticulous detail that Michael could not ignore it. As Michael sat in contemplation, the phone on his desk rang. On the other end was the head of the internal investigation team, speaking urgently. "Mr. Thornton, we've traced the source of the issue. Ethan Carter. He embezzled a substantial amount of money and inflated the financial reports. The company is on the verge of bankruptcy." Michael dropped the phone, the world around him feeling as though it was crumbling. Ethan, his CFO, the one person he had trusted completely, was the betrayer. He gazed out the window, the city lights sparkling below, but they couldn't hide the emptiness he felt inside. Michael took a deep breath, then reached for the stack of papers on his desk, his eyes flashing with determination. "Now I have to act before it's too late to salvage anything." Have you ever placed your trust in the wrong person and had to pay the price? Michael Thornton, who once believed he had everything under control, now faces the harsh reality. The one he trusted most has betrayed him. But behind the scenes, an unexpected figure has quietly been turning everything around. If you're curious about how an ordinary person can flip the script, hit the follow button and join me as we uncover the rest of this story. Now, let's rewind to the moment that anonymous letter appeared and started to shake the very foundations of an empire. Samantha Johnson had worked in one of the city's largest corporations for 20 years. She performed simple tasks every day, sweeping floors, emptying trash, wiping surfaces, and ensuring that the buildings were spotless before employees arrived. She was the first to arrive in the morning and the last to leave at night. To most of her colleagues, Samantha was just a cleaning woman, a face they saw but never really noticed. To them, she was part of the scenery, like the furniture or the walls. No one knew anything about her life, her dreams, or her past. Nor did they care. They passed her by, maybe with a nod if they felt polite, but rarely a word. Even the executives whom Samantha encountered regularly barely acknowledged her presence. They would stride in and out of the building in sharp suits, clutching their phones or discussing important deals. She was merely the help, someone doing a job they didn't want to bother with. But Samantha was more than just a woman with a broom. She paid attention to everything around her, observing and learning as she worked. She stayed late at night when everyone else had gone home. She often eavesdropped on conversations in the conference rooms. The executives, assuming she couldn't hear or understand, spoke freely around her. They discussed business strategies, company profits, and financial decisions. They talked about who would get promoted and who would be fired. Samantha listened intently to everything, noting details that no one else would because, to them, she was invisible. Over the years, Samantha developed a deep understanding of how the company operated. She knew the employees, the company structure, and even some of the confidential issues that only came up in closed-door meetings. Though she had no official role in the business, Samantha's sharp mind allowed her to piece together the puzzle of what was happening in the company, both good and bad. Besides her daily work, Samantha had a natural talent for paying attention to detail. As she cleaned every nook and cranny of the office, her mind was constantly working. Cleaning gave her time to think. She often wondered about the company's problems, the decisions the executives made, and how everything worked. But of course, no one ever asked for her opinion. No one cared that Samantha might actually know more than they thought. Samantha didn't resent her job. In fact, she was very proud of her work. She came from a family that valued hard work, and she knew she was supporting her family with her own dedication. She didn't seek approval from the executives or employees, but she couldn't help but notice the stark difference in how people treated her. Most of them seemed to think that just because she wore a cleaning uniform, she couldn't do anything else. They didn't know she had once had a different career, a job that required intelligence and skills they couldn't imagine. They couldn't fathom that the woman quietly going about her work possessed a sharp mind capable of perceiving things they couldn't see. Samantha remembered a time when things were different. Years ago, she had worked in the corporate world as a financial analyst for a small firm. She had spent years poring over numbers, analyzing markets, and making business decisions. However, life had dealt her a cruel hand. A family tragedy had forced Samantha to abandon her promising career and accept a job with a stable schedule and immediate pay. Cleaning was the only work she could find at the time, and although it wasn't her dream job, Samantha took pride in doing it well. Despite the shift in her career, Samantha never abandoned her analytical mind. She retained her keen observational skills and continued to follow the financial world, reading articles and keeping up with market trends in her spare time. Over the years, she had realized that knowledge was power, and even though she was no longer in a position of authority, her business acumen never left her. So when Samantha overheard employees discussing sensitive company matters, her ears perked up and her eyes widened. She noticed financial reports left on desks, glanced at charts on whiteboards, and began to notice a disturbing pattern. The numbers she saw didn't add up, and it made her suspicious. Of course, she had no authority to speak up. She was just a cleaning lady. Who would listen to her? But something about the way the company was operating made her uneasy. As she went about her daily tasks, Samantha noticed more and more anomalies. She wasn't being nosy. Everything she saw was right in front of her because people simply didn't think twice about leaving things lying around carelessly. Whether it was a discarded financial document or a whispered conversation. In the hallway, Samantha absorbed information like a sponge. She knew something was wrong with the company, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. The employees and executives never gave Samantha a second thought. They didn't realize that she was not only cleaning their offices but was also quietly observing the inner workings of the company. To them, Samantha was simply a woman doing a simple job, but in reality, Samantha was increasingly realizing that the company she had worked for all these years was heading for trouble, and she, the unnoticed cleaning woman, was the only one who seemed to realize it. Michael Thornton was a man who commanded respect, whether people liked him or not. He had worked tirelessly to build the company from the ground up, and in his eyes, no one understood its value as much as he did. His leadership style was cold and harsh. Although the company thrived under his guidance, it came at a price. Michael believed that success was not only about making money but also about maintaining power, and he had no tolerance for mistakes. Employees feared him, and they had good reason to. He had fired people for minor mistakes, humiliating them in front of their colleagues before showing them the door. Michael thrived on power. He viewed everyone in the company as either assets or liabilities, and had no patience for those who did not meet his standards. The senior executives in the company reflected his attitude, following his example and treating those below them with similar indifference. To Michael, Samantha was no different from the surroundings. She was just part of the background, someone with no influence, no power. In fact, he barely saw her as a human being, but rather as a tool to keep his office clean and shiny. One morning, as Samantha was mopping the floor in the lobby, she sensed a tension in the air, as if everything around her was beginning to change. Michael strode through the building, on his way to an important meeting. The sound of his expensive leather shoes echoed on the freshly mopped marble floor, the sound resonating in the quiet space. He glanced down at Samantha, who was diligently working, and a sneer crossed his lips. He said nothing, just a fleeting expression of contempt, lasting only a few seconds. To him, Samantha was like air, a face he would forget as soon as he walked away. This was not an isolated incident. Michael's indifference to those who worked for him was evident in his demeanor. To him, the cleaners, the receptionists, and other low-level employees were just cogs in the machine he had built. They didn't deserve his attention, nor did they need it. His focus was on the bigger picture, growing the company, making more money, and maintaining his position at the top. One evening at a company gala, a group of young executives stood around, laughing and chatting about office gossip. The party was lavish, with champagne flowing, and jazz music filling the room. Michael, who had just greeted some of the company's major investors, happened to pass by the group just as they began to joke about Samantha. One of them, with a laugh, said, "She's been working here for how long? She probably never dreams of doing anything but cleaning." The group laughed together, finding amusement in the idea that Samantha would forever be just an office cleaner. They saw her as part of the scenery, someone destined to do this job until she could no longer walk. Michael, overhearing the conversation, joined in with a slight sneer. To him, the idea of someone like Samantha, of Samantha rising above her station, seemed absurd. After all, she was just the help. Michael didn't give it much thought. But little did he know that the very woman he was mocking would soon become the central figure in the company's biggest upheaval. This was not an isolated incident. Michael's indifference to the people who worked under him was evident in the way he carried himself. To him, the cleaners, receptionists, and other low-level employees were just cogs in the machine he had built. They did not deserve his attention, nor did they need it. His concerns were focused on the bigger picture, growing the company, making more money, and staying on top. One evening at a company gala, a group of young executives stood around, laughing and chatting about office gossip. The party was lavish, with champagne flowing freely and jazz music playing softly. Michael, who had just hosted some of the company's big investors, happened to walk past the group just as they began joking about Samantha. One of them, with a laugh, said, "She's been working here for so long, she probably never dreamed of doing anything other than cleaning." The group laughed, finding amusement in the idea that Samantha would forever be their office cleaner. They saw her as part of the scenery, someone destined to do this job until she could no longer walk. Michael, hearing the conversation, joined in with a slight chuckle. To him, the idea of someone like Samantha, of Samantha rising above her position, seemed absurd. After all, she was just a maid. It didn't take Michael long to think about it. Little did he know, the woman he was laughing at would soon become the central figure in the company's biggest shakeup. Michael's arrogance wasn't just reflected in the way he treated his lower-level employees. He runs the company with an iron fist, believing that his decisions are always the right ones. He does not take feedback well and certainly does not welcome criticism. Board members and executives who work with him are careful not to question his judgment. Michael's word is final, and anyone who dares to challenge him is quickly out of the company. This tough attitude had made him many enemies over the years, but Michael didn't care. In his mind, he was untouchable, the company was thriving, and as long as the profits kept coming, nothing else mattered. What Michael didn't realize, however, was that his focus on power and control had blinded him to the real problems lurking beneath the surface. The company he had built, once strong and successful, was now showing cracks. Poor financial management, concealed by the very executives he trusted, was threatening the foundation of everything he had worked so hard to build. Michael, though brilliant in his early years, had become complacent. He believed he knew everything about the company and the industry, but in reality, he had become detached from the day-to-day operations. He didn't see the warning signs, and because he looked down on low-level employees like Samantha, he didn't know that she knew a lot. As Samantha quietly went about her work, no one paid any attention to her, including Michael and the other directors. Samantha saw more than they could imagine. She knew the company better than anyone else. She saw the waste, the mismanagement, and the risky financial decisions they were making. She listened in on conversations that weren't meant for her and saw the documents left in disarray on desks. Samantha didn't need someone like Michael to acknowledge what was going on in the company. She had all the information she needed. While Michael sat on his throne of power, believing himself to be invulnerable, Samantha was piecing together a puzzle that even the CEO couldn't see. She watched the directors make bad decisions and cover up their mistakes. She saw the nervous glances exchanged in meetings and heard the whispered conversations about missing funds and upcoming layoffs. While Michael smiled at her as if she were unimportant, Samantha quietly gathered the information that would eventually lead to his downfall. In the boardroom, Michael commanded attention. His presence was intimidating. His voice was strong and authoritative. He believed that the company's success was a direct result of his leadership, and in many ways, he was right. But he didn't realize that his complacency had blinded him to the truth. The empire he had built was crumbling from within, and he was too busy maintaining his image of power to notice. Michael still believes that the people under him are no threat, especially a janitor. But as the days go by, Samantha is slowly discovering more about the dangerous situation of the company. She doesn't need anyone's recognition or approval. She doesn't seek praise or validation. She is just someone who sees the truth and knows how to act on it. While Michael and his directors laugh at her and dismiss her as just a janitor, Samantha quietly holds the key to the company's future. Her knowledge, observations, and understanding of what's going on will soon be revealed, and when that happens, everything will change. Samantha Johnson, who everyone thought was just a janitor, carries a wealth of knowledge and experience that no one could have guessed. Before life took her on a different path, Samantha was a financial analyst at a small but growing company. She researched markets, analyzed data, and advised on investment decisions. She was good at it, her sharp mind could spot patterns that others missed, and she had a knack for solving financial puzzles. But life, as it often did, threw her a curveball. Personal tragedies hit Samantha hard, forcing her to abandon a promising career. Family came first, and when disaster struck, she needed a steady job to support them immediately. Cleaning was the only job she could find at the time, and while it wasn't what she had envisioned for herself, she took it without complaint. She had mouths to feed and bills to pay, and she wasn't afraid of hardship. Still, the analytical side of her never stopped. In her spare time, Samantha kept up with the business world. She subscribes to financial newsletters, reads online reports, and follows market trends. Even as she mops floors and takes out the trash, her mind is always active. She understands the language of finance, knows how money flows, and can decipher the numbers behind a company's success or failure. It's a skill she's never lost, even as her life has taken a different turn. As Samantha continued her cleaning duties at the company, she couldn't help but notice things that others often overlooked. Managers and employees often left financial reports and spreadsheets strewn across their desks or even pinned up on bulletin boards. To them, these pieces of paper were just part of their daily routine, and they thought no one would notice their importance. But to Samantha, these documents weren't just worthless pieces of paper, they were clues, and she knew exactly how to read them. One day, while cleaning a junior manager's office, Samantha came across a quarterly financial report that had been left exposed. She glanced at it and noticed something strange. The revenue figures didn't match the expense estimates she'd seen earlier on another desk. Curious, she took a closer look. Not only did the numbers not match, they were completely off. To a layperson, this might have seemed like a simple mistake, but Samantha's eyes had been trained over the years to know that it wasn't. It was a warning sign. In the weeks that followed, Samantha continued to notice similar discrepancies. Different departments had mismatched reports, and the numbers in some internal documents seemed to be overstated. She recalled one document that had particularly troubled her, one she'd seen in the CFO's office. The forecasts for the next quarter seemed too optimistic given the current financial situation. Samantha knew enough to realize that this wasn't just poor accounting, but something much more serious: financial mismanagement. In Samantha's mind, the bits of information she gathered during her cleaning shifts swirled. The numbers were telling a story that no one else seemed to be paying attention to. The company was headed for a serious crisis, and it wasn't just a matter of poor management. Something was going on purpose. Money was being allocated in an irrational way, and expenses were piling up faster than the company could handle. If things continued as they were, the company would be headed for financial disaster. Despite the mounting evidence that Samantha was uncovering, she knew she couldn't just walk up to someone and tell them what she had found. Who would believe her? She was just a janitor. She doubted anyone in the company would give her time, let alone listen to her concerns about the financial situation. But Samantha couldn't stand by and watch the company crumble, especially when she knew she could help. Samantha began taking notes, writing down details of what she saw in the forgotten reports, then comparing them with documents she found in other offices. She noted discrepancies, overstated forecasts, and troubling patterns that kept emerging. Her notes began to paint a clearer picture of what was happening in the company. Financial mismanagement wasn't just a single oversight, It was a system. There were layers of bad decisions, from overspending on unnecessary projects to hiding losses in the books. As the weeks passed, Samantha's anxiety grew. The company's directors were either unaware of what was happening, or they were deliberately covering it up to protect their own interests. She couldn't say which, but one thing she was certain of. The company was headed for a crisis, and if nothing was done, it would collapse. Financial collapse would be a terrible disaster, not only for the executives but also for all the employees who depended on the company for their livelihood. One evening, after Samantha finished cleaning, she sat quietly in the break room, thinking about all she had discovered. The company was on the brink of financial collapse, but no one seemed to realize it. Samantha wondered how long it would be before the truth came out, before the numbers beat the lies and everything fell apart. She had the knowledge and skills to do something about it, but she was stuck in the role of a cleaner, a role where no one expected her to have the answers. However, Samantha was not one to give up easily. Her past experiences had taught her to be resilient, to keep going even when the odds were against her. She understood that just because she was considered a maid did not mean she was useless. The situation is dire, but Samantha also realizes that she has a distinct advantage: no one is watching her. Everyone in the company has underestimated her, and that gives her the element of surprise. As she ponders her next move, Samantha realizes that the fate of the company, and possibly her own future, is in her hands. The question now is, what will she do with what she has discovered? Will she continue to be the invisible cleaner, or will she seek to expose the truth, even if it means stepping out of the shadows? The time to clean up other people's messes is almost over, and it is time for Samantha to clean up something much bigger, a financial disaster waiting to happen. Samantha continues to walk through. The company continued to operate without Samantha's knowledge as it had for the past 20 years, but now her purpose was different. She was no longer just someone who swept floors or took out the trash. She began to observe, listen, and collect information. Every conversation, every forgotten document became part of a larger puzzle that she was slowly piecing together. The anomalies in the financial reports that she had noticed earlier were not isolated incidents, but part of a larger problem that went deep into the core of the company. Employees were hiding losses, falsifying figures, and engaging in risky transactions that no one dared to confront. And all the while, the company was spiraling toward the financial abyss. Samantha began to keep detailed records of each one. She took notes of every anomaly in the financial records, every suspicious conversation she overheard, and every shady transaction she noticed in closed-door meetings. She knew that what she was uncovering was dangerous, and she wasn't naive enough to think she could just walk into the CEO's office and expose the truth without solid evidence. If she did, no one would believe her, and they might even turn against her, accuse her of being a snoop, or even fire her. So Samantha kept quiet, continuing to play the role of invisible cleaner, while quietly building a case file. Every day during work hours, she listened to the conversations around her. Executives chatted casually in the hallways, thinking she wasn't paying attention. They discussed business strategy, future earnings reports, and the company's public image. But beneath that confident facade, Samantha could hear the worry in their voices, the strained tones they tried to hide. They knew things weren't right, but no one realized how bad things were. One particular conversation caught Samantha's attention. She was cleaning near the executive conference room late one evening. One night, two senior executives walked by, deep in conversation about the upcoming quarterly earnings report, but their voices were strained. One of them mentioned that the numbers weren't looking good and that they would have to adjust the report to make the company look better than it actually was. Samantha's ears perked up, a chill running down her spine. She knew exactly what it meant. They were planning to hide the losses. As the men walked away, oblivious to her presence, Samantha felt her heart pounding, as if it were about to burst from her chest. She had long suspected that the company was hiding financial troubles, but now she knew for sure. The executives were deliberately manipulating the numbers to create a false image of the company to investors and the public. This was no longer just mismanagement, it was fraud. If they continued down this path, the entire company would collapse, taking hundreds of employees with them. But worse, Samantha realized that if the truth were exposed, The company's leadership could face serious legal consequences. Over the next few weeks, Samantha became increasingly focused on the internal workings of the company. She noticed that some employees were working late, attending secret meetings, or rushing to cover their tracks. Financial statements were edited at the last minute and expenses were hidden in hard-to-find places in the budget. She heard executives talking about off-the-books deals, underdocumented partnerships, and inflated profit figures that had no basis in reality. The deeper she looked, the clearer it became that this was not just a company in trouble, but one on the brink of collapse. Michael Thornton, the CEO, remained oblivious to the chaos unfolding right under his nose. His arrogance blinded him to the warning signs, and he continued to run the company as if everything was perfect. He spoke of expansion plans and future investments in glowing terms, completely unaware that his empire was built on lies. His absolute confidence in his leadership abilities made him unshakable, and no one dared to tell him the truth. After all, Michael was not someone to be questioned. Samantha watched him from afar, day after day, as he glided through the office, shaking hands with investors, giving motivational speeches to employees, and smiling for the cameras. The lack of awareness was astonishing. How could someone so smart and successful not notice what was happening right in front of him? Samantha felt conflicted emotions welling up inside her. Part of her wanted to see it all fall apart, the arrogance, the disrespect for those who had kept the company afloat, the blind belief in their own perfection. It all seemed destined for failure, perhaps they deserved it. But Samantha was more than a silent observer. She understood the gravity of the situation. She knew that if the company collapsed, it wouldn't just be the executives who would pay the price. Hundreds of employees, people who had nothing to do with the financial shroud, would lose their jobs. Families would be hurt. The fallout would spread far beyond the boardroom. And even though it seemed like it had gone too far, Samantha still felt a sense of responsibility that couldn't be ignored. Samantha felt a tension rise in her chest as she realized that she had both the knowledge and the skills to help, but she couldn't ignore it. The unease, like unconscious fingers clenching, grew inside her. As the days passed, Samantha realized more and more that she could expose the truth, but she also knew that doing so would put her in danger. The executives had no reason to trust or even listen to her, and if she made the slightest mistake, it could all come back to bite her. But at the same time, keeping quiet was no longer an option. The company's collapse was no longer a remote possibility, but a ticking time bomb, and someone had to act before it was too late. As the weeks passed, Samantha continued to gather information, her notebook filling with details, numbers, and patterns. She was no longer just collecting random pieces, she was building a case. Each note she wrote brought her closer to understanding the full scope of the company's financial disaster, and as she connected the pieces, the picture began to become clearer. The executives had not only engaged in shady dealings, they had committed massive fraud, concealing their losses from investors and gambling with the company's future. Yet despite the danger, Samantha felt no fear. Instead, she felt a growing sense of purpose. She had worked at the company for 20 years, witnessed its growth from the beginning, and now she was the only one who truly understood what was going on behind the scenes. The employees continued to laugh at her, dismissing her as just a janitor, but little did they know that Samantha held the company's future in her hands. She had two choices. She could let the company collapse, standing on the sidelines, or, as the empire crumbled around them, Samantha had two choices. She could stand by and watch everything fall apart, or she could step forward, using what she knew to try to save the company from herself. That evening, as Samantha walked silently through Ethan Carter's office, her heart pounded. The unease in her chest made her feel as if her body was being held back, unable to breathe freely. Ethan had always been aloof and calculating, but Samantha had never been able to pinpoint exactly what was strange about him until now. The open file on his desk seemed to be inviting her to look. She glanced quickly around the room, making sure no one was there, to protect her privacy. No one would suspect anything because the janitor was always there, but this was another story. What Samantha was about to discover was far bigger than the mess she had cleaned up. She glanced at the page and felt a knot in her stomach. The numbers were threatening. Unexplained expenses, money transferred to shady accounts, and worst of all, clear signs that Ethan had been siphoning money to cover up the company's financial failures. Things were worse than she'd imagined. The company wasn't just in trouble, it was on the brink of bankruptcy, and Ethan was doing everything he could to keep the truth hidden. If word got out, hundreds of people would lose their jobs, investments would disappear, and thousands of lives would be disrupted. Samantha's heart raced, her mind reeling as she thought about the implications. This wasn't just shady financial wrongdoing, it was the livelihoods of countless people. Every day, Samantha saw receptionists, cleaners, and laborers who had no idea their futures were hanging by a thread. She knew what she had to do, but the question kept swirling around in her head, weighing heavily on her mind. How could she, a mere janitor in the eyes of the directors, have brought down a CFO and exposed such a deep cover-up? The next morning, Samantha decided she could no longer keep quiet. But she knew she had to act wisely. It would be dangerous to confront Ethan directly, and it was equally risky to meet with Michael Thornton, the CEO. He was blind to the chaos going on around him and too complacent to listen to anyone, especially her. But Samantha had something few people had. She knew how to blend into the background. She had watched the company for years and knew exactly how to get her message across without drawing attention. That afternoon, Samantha decided to take a calculated risk. She typed an anonymous letter detailing everything she had discovered about the company's financial irregularities. She was careful not to reveal too much, knowing that her credibility depended on how the information was received. She didn't need to overwhelm Michael with every detail, just get his attention, make him look more closely at what was going on right under his nose. In the letter, Samantha pointed out the big red flags, the discrepancies in the financial statements, the suspect accounts Ethan was managing, and the impending bankruptcy that no one else had noticed. She wrote with precision, making sure to make every point clear without revealing who the letter was from. She knew it was unsafe to reveal her identity at this point, because if Ethan or any of the directors found out who was behind the letter, her job and possibly her safety would be in jeopardy. Samantha printed the letter and carefully placed it in an envelope. She waited until the office was almost deserted, then walked over to Michael's office. His desk was covered with papers and reports, but Samantha knew where he always kept the important ones. That was where he checked first thing every morning. Taking a deep breath, Samantha placed the envelope on top of his reports, making sure it was the first thing he saw when he got to the office the next morning. As she left the office that evening, Samantha's mind was in a whirlwind. Would Michael read the letter? And if he did, would he take it seriously? No one knew how he would react. She couldn't predict, because Michael might see it as nonsense or worse, an attempt to discredit her. But deep down, Samantha hoped that the truth in her words would be enough to wake him up. She had done her part, the rest was up to Michael. The next morning, Samantha continued her usual cleaning routine, cleaning the offices and making sure everything was in order. But her mind couldn't help but drift away from other thoughts, focused on what might be happening in the CEO's office right now. Was Michael reading the letter? Was he putting the pieces together, realizing that his company was in far greater trouble than he had imagined, or had he just tossed it aside, too confident in his leadership abilities to believe such a disaster could happen on his watch? Samantha couldn't afford to look nervous or suspicious, so she forced herself to keep her usual calm demeanor, blending into the background and going unnoticed. Yet as time passed, she couldn't help but wonder if her anonymous warning had made any difference. That afternoon, as she cleaned near the director's offices, Samantha heard something that gave her hope. Michael's assistant was on the phone in a hushed voice. He's very angry. There's something wrong with the financial statements. He's called an emergency meeting with the board. Samantha's heart pounded, feeling as if someone was squeezing it. The letter had worked. Michael had been warned, and now action was being taken. This was just the beginning, but Samantha knew that once Michael began investigating, the truth would finally come out. Ethan's days of manipulating money and covering up the company's failures were over. Samantha wasn't relieved, however. She knew that while the wheels had been set in motion, there was still a long way to go. The people running the company were powerful, and they wouldn't give up without a fight. Samantha had done her part to warn. Now she had to watch carefully, stay one step ahead, and make sure the company didn't collapse before the truth was fully revealed. In the days that followed, as tension filled the office, Samantha kept a low profile, listening, observing, and quietly preparing for what might happen next. She knew she had started something irreversible, but she also understood that the real battle had only just begun. The survival of the company and her own future hung in the balance. Michael Thornton sat in his office, staring at the wall, his mind blank. The crumpled letter lay on his desk. 4 days had passed, and he had dismissed the anonymous warning as the work of a disgruntled employee or a baseless rumor designed to stir up trouble. Who would dare question his leadership? He had built this company from scratch, turned it into a financial powerhouse. But something about the tone of the letter made him feel more uneasy than he cared to admit. Michael was not the type to act on anonymous accusations. He believed in hard evidence, not whispers in the dark. As the days passed, however, Michael began to notice small but disturbing details that matched the ones in the letter. Reports that should have been approved were missing signatures. Numbers that had always matched perfectly now showed anomalies. At first, he dismissed the feeling as a coincidence. However, as the days passed, his suspicions grew. He tried to ignore it, but his keen senses, honed over years of running the company, could not deceive him, telling him that something was wrong. The letter, though anonymous, was too precise, too detailed to ignore any longer. Reluctantly, Michael ordered an internal investigation. He told no one what motivated this decision, not even his closest advisors. If there was a problem, he wanted to find out for himself without anyone noticing. This was a move that surprised the senior management team. Michael had always been confident, even overconfident, in the stability of the empire he had built. But now, in the silence of the office, the certainty that had previously been his strength became a double-edged sword. Internal auditors worked feverishly, and it wasn't long before the first cracks began to appear. The initial findings were truly disturbing. There were discrepancies in the financial reports, stretching back years. Further investigation revealed shocking facts. Some of the company's biggest deals had been executed clumsily, leaving the company exposed to huge financial risks. Losses were hidden in the corners of the budget, while profits were inflated to please investors. But the most damning discovery was the direct involvement of Ethan Carter, the company's CFO. Ethan, it turned out, had been embezzling money for years. Ethan had transferred money to personal accounts using complex accounting tricks to cover his tracks. Worse, he had orchestrated fraudulent schemes to inflate the company's performance, deceiving shareholders and employees alike. The company was not only in trouble, it was on the brink of collapse. The mountain of debt and financial mismanagement that Ethan had buried was finally about to collapse. Michael was so angry that his body shook, his hands clenched uncontrollably. He called Ethan immediately, but the confrontation was not satisfactory. Ethan tried to justify himself, claiming that everything was a misunderstanding, but the undeniable evidence hit Michael hard in the stomach. He felt as if the world had collapsed beneath his feet. Left with no other choice, Michael was forced to fire Ethan immediately. As Ethan walked out of the building for the last time, a surge of anger and humiliation surged through Michael. How could he, who had prided himself on being in control, have overlooked all of this? It felt like a punch to the chest, making it hard to breathe. The investigation continued to dig deeper, uncovering layers of lies. Michael couldn't help but feel paralyzed by deception, the confidence that had always been his strength now a burden. He had always seen himself as a strong leader who could spot problems as soon as they started to go haywire. But this time, he had no idea that the company, the product of his life's work, was on the brink of collapse, and it was the anonymous letter that helped him realize the truth. When Michael reviewed the final report, he suddenly realized the severity of the crisis. Not only had Ethan stolen money from the company, but his financial fraud had put the entire business in jeopardy. If the truth were revealed publicly, the company's stock would plummet, investors would flee, and the company could face criminal charges. This was not just a scandal, it was a disaster waiting to happen. And the worst part was that Michael knew it. Without that letter, Michael would have walked into the financial storm without even knowing it. But the question that haunted him was not what had happened, but who had sent the letter. The investigation turned up no clues. The person who warned him, the person who had saved the company from disaster, had been so clever as to leave no trace of his identity. The details were so precise that it was impossible not to think that the person had close ties to the company's financial operations. However, Michael could not determine who had done it. The anonymous whistleblower had probably saved his company, maybe even his career, and yet Michael had no one to thank. He replayed the events over and over in his head, searching for a sign, a clue that he might have missed. He even considered calling the police to track down the author of the letter, but what good would that do? The person who sent the letter clearly didn't want to be found. They weren't taking credit, they were just acting to stop the company from falling apart. Michael knew he had to respect that. But even as the investigation was over and the company began to take steps to recover, the mystery lingered. He couldn't stop thinking about the invisible hand that had been watching the company all this time. The way the letter had been written wasn't the work of an outsider. This was someone who knew the company inside and out, watching every move, watching for financial woes before they became uncontrollable storms. In the weeks that followed, as the board rushed to take corrective action and reassure investors, Michael became increasingly obsessed with discovering the identity of the anonymous whistleblower. He quietly probed, prying information from his own executives. No one knew. Some executives speculated that it might be a disgruntled employee, but Michael knew better. This wasn't revenge, it was an act of redemption. As the days turned into weeks, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that the person who had saved his company was somewhere nearby, silently watching. It was an eerie feeling and it made him think. Despite his power and influence, it was someone outside the highest echelons of the company, someone who knew the situation, who saw the danger before him, who acted when no one else dared. But for now, the identity of the anonymous whistleblower remains a mystery, and Michael can only be grateful that someone, somewhere, cared enough to act when he didn't. As the company slowly stabilizes, the question haunts Michael. Who is the unsung hero who saved him from his own blindness? Michael sat down at his desk, his mind still reeling from the aftermath of the investigation. The company was slowly stabilizing, but the damage from Ethan's scheme was still taking time to repair. Then, out of the blue, he received a meeting request from Samantha, the cleaner. Confusion mingled with curiosity. What did she want? It was unusual for someone in her position to request a private meeting with the CEO, but something in her eyes when she had approached him earlier made Michael hesitate. There was a gentle confidence in her that he had not recognized before. Unable to refuse, he agreed to the meeting, both curious and uncertain of what he would face. That evening, as the office quieted and the lights dimmed, Samantha entered Michael's large office with a calmness that surprised him. She wasn't fazed by the grandeur of the place, nor was she intimidated by the man sitting behind the large rosewood desk. On the contrary, as Michael watched her, he noticed that she seemed completely in control of the situation, as if she knew exactly what she was doing. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Mr. Thornton," Samantha began, her voice steady. She held a small file in her hand and as she sat down, she placed it on Michael's desk. Michael leaned forward, still confused by the situation. "How can I help you, Samantha?" he asked, trying to keep his tone neutral, though the confusion was still evident in his eyes. He'd seen her hanging around the building for years, but it never occurred to him that she might have something to say about the company's work. It didn't take long for Samantha to open the file and reveal a neatly arranged stack of documents. Financial reports, transaction histories, and detailed notes that Michael immediately recognized as vital to the investigation. His eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. These were the same errors the investigators had found, but the level of detail in Samantha's notes was even more precise than their findings. "I've been watching," Samantha said, her voice soft, her eyes trained on Michael's reaction. "At first I thought it might be a mistake, but then I saw the same patterns over and over again." Michael's hands froze on the papers, his mind struggling to make sense of what was happening. "You know about this?" He faltered, still unable to believe what he was hearing. Samantha nodded. "I worked as a financial analyst before I took this job. The circumstances changed, but my ability to read numbers didn't, she said, her voice calm. I saw the warning signs in your reports, the ones that were left on your desk. I didn't want to jump to conclusions without solid evidence, so I started taking notes, gathering everything I could. Then when I realized how serious the situation was, I sent you the anonymous letter. Michael leaned back in his chair, unable to speak. The room fell silent. The anonymous letter, the one that had started this investigation, had come from Samantha, the cleaning girl he had barely noticed for years. She had seen the signs long before anyone else had. It felt like the room had turned, the balance of power shifting in ways Michael had never expected. For the first time in his career, he felt vulnerable, like he was on the outside of the company's powerful people. Samantha continued, unfazed by his silence. I'm not here to threaten you or make demands, Mr. Thornton, but I believe we can help each other. You're in a difficult situation, and I have information that can help you stabilize the company before it gets worse. Michael's mind raced as he tried to process what she was saying. The irony of the situation seemed too much to bear. The person who had saved his company from bankruptcy was the person he had ignored all these years. He asked, his voice sharper than he had intended. What do you want? Samantha smiled slightly, noticing the change in Michael's tone. I'm not asking for much, she said, her voice calm. I just want a chance. I know this company better than anyone thinks, and I've proven that I have the skills to contribute in ways no one expects. All I'm asking for is an opportunity to use those skills in a position that's worthy of my abilities, not just a job title. Michael stared at her, his mind racing with all sorts of thoughts. The woman sitting before him wasn't who he thought she was. She wasn't just a janitor. She had the intelligence, the vision, and the audacity to expose a scandal that could destroy everything he'd built. And now, she was offering him a solution, along with a personal request that made perfect sense in the circumstances. He leaned forward, rubbing his temples as he tried to gather his thoughts. You want a position in the company? He asked, still trying to make sense of it all. After all these years, he was finally realizing what Samantha could do. Samantha nodded again, her voice unwavering. I've been patient, Mr. Thornton. I've never expected anything from this company other than a paycheck. But I can't stand by and watch it go downhill when I know I can help. I've proven that I understand the numbers, I understand the risks. Give me a chance, and I'll help you rebuild it. Michael's mind was racing. He had lost faith in his executives, lost confidence in the stability of the company. But now, Samantha was offering him a chance to turn things around. She was right. She had proven herself to be more capable than many of the people he'd trusted over the years. The boldness of her request both puzzled and impressed him. A long silence, Michael spoke, his voice low. If what you say is true, and you helped save this company from the brink of collapse, perhaps it's time for me to start seeing people for who they are, not just by their titles. He sighed, the weight of the new realization weighing down his body. Samantha, if you're willing to work with me, I'll make sure you get the opportunity you're asking for. Samantha's smile widened a little. She had known this moment was coming, ever since she'd sent that letter. She'd been prepared for it. Now, the future was in her hands, and for the first time in years, she felt like she could control her own destiny. Michael stood up and held out his hand. Samantha shook it, and in that moment, the power shifted again, but this time it was a shift of mutual respect. The woman he'd ignored for years was now the one who could save his company, and possibly his reputation. When Samantha walked out of the office that evening, she knew things would never be the same again. The janitor who had been largely ignored before was now the center of the company's recovery. The path ahead, though uncertain, was one she was ready to take. Michael Thornton sat in his office, staring out the window, his mind still a jumble of thoughts. His world was falling apart around him, everything was pressing down on him, from the investigation, the revelations of Ethan's betrayal, to Samantha's sudden rise. It was all pouring down on him like a dark cloud. He had always believed himself to be untouchable, the driving force behind the company's success, but now he realized how wrong he had been. He had failed to see the corruption right under his nose, and it was Samantha Johnson, the cleaning lady, who had opened his eyes. Now she was standing before him with a choice he never thought he would face. Samantha's demeanor had not changed since she had first walked into his office. She still spoke with the same calm and authoritative tone, but now there was a determination in her words that Michael could not ignore. The company was not out of the woods, and even though Ethan Carter had been fired, Samantha knew that Michael's leadership, or rather his lack of leadership, was part of the problem. She had seen firsthand his arrogance, his blindness to the reality of the company, and it was that which had caused things to spiral out of control. Michael, knowing everything, couldn't believe what he was hearing. A cleaner was giving him an ultimatum. The idea seemed absurd, even laughable, but as Samantha stood before him, presenting the last piece of evidence she had collected, documents that showed Michael's direct negligence in ignoring the company's financial mismanagement, he realized that the power shift was irreversible. Samantha now held it all together. "I didn't come here to destroy you, Mr. Thornton," Samantha said, her voice soft but firm. "I could have gone public a long time ago. But I didn't. I gave you the chance to save this company, and I helped you do it. But if things really want to change, you need to sit down." Michael's face hardened. He wasn't the type to take orders, especially from someone like Samantha. His lips were pressed together, his eyes were sharp as knives, and there was obvious anger in them. "You think you can come in here and take control?" he asked, his voice trying to contain the anger that was rising in his. "Do you know what it takes to run a company like this?" Samantha's expression didn't change, her eyes steady, unwavering in the face of Michael's anger. She had braced herself for this reaction, but she didn't back down. "I know what it takes to see the truth, Mr. Thornton," she replied, her voice steady but resolute. "And right now, this company needs a leader who can face that truth. You built this company, yes, but you also turned a blind eye to the people who made it what it is. That's why things went wrong. You couldn't see beyond your own success, and that's what got us here." Michael's jaw clenched, his blood turning cold as he tried to swallow his pride. "You think you're the one who can fix everything?" he asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. "I'm not asking to replace you," Samantha replied, her voice as calm as ever. "I don't need to be the leader, but if I open up what I have, the board will listen to me. I saved this company from collapse. Now I'm asking you to do the right thing. Step down and let someone else lead. Someone who can restore confidence in the future of this company." There was a long silence between them, as long as the tense moments before a major decision. Michael felt his mind spin. He had always been the one in charge, always the one making the tough decisions. But now, he was faced with a choice that felt like it wasn't his. The thought of leaving the company he had built, the company he had poured his blood, sweat, and tears into, felt like a death sentence. But the truth was undeniable. Samantha was right. If he refused, the scandal would destroy everything. The board would kick him out, the media would devour him, and the company's stock price would plummet. The evidence Samantha had was enough to destroy him, and she knew it. He felt the walls closing in on him, the weight of his mistake pressing down on him until he could barely breathe. The irony was inescapable. He, a man of power, was now in the hands of the woman he had taken for granted for years. The same woman who had listened in on boardroom conversations while mopping the floors, who had pieced together the company's financial collapse and ultimately saved it from destruction. And now, she was the one who was making him a choice he couldn't refuse. A heavy sigh escaped Michael's lips, and he finally broke the long silence. "If I resign, what happens next?" Samantha's eyes softened a little, but the determination in her voice remained as firm as ever. "The company will survive. The board will choose a new CEO, someone who understands the importance of every part of this company, not just the bottom line. I will stay on to ensure a smooth transition, but the board will need to know that real change is happening." Michael looked at her, his mind reeling. He had spent years building his empire, and now in a few short days, it had all been ripped away from him. But deep down, he knew Samantha was right. His time as CEO was over. His arrogance had blinded him, and it was time for a new leader, someone who could rebuild the company's reputation from the ground up. "Okay," he said, his voice soft but filled with acceptance. The words caught in his throat. "I will resign, but not because you forced me to. I am doing this for the company. Samantha nodded, knowing he needed to retain some dignity in this moment. That was all anyone could ask. Michael stood up, walked to the window, and gazed out at the city skyline. The scene that had always given him a sense of power and control now seemed foreign, like a world that no longer belonged to him. For years, he had been the face of the company, the one behind its success, but in the end, it was the silent and unnoticed woman, the janitor Samantha, who had saved it from collapse. As Samantha turned to leave, Michael spoke one last time, his voice almost inaudible. How could I have missed all this? Samantha paused at the door, her hand resting lightly on the doorknob, looking at him. You wouldn't look, she replied simply, and left the room, leaving Michael with his thoughts racing. The next morning, news of Michael Thornton's resignation spread like wildfire through the company. Some were stunned, some were relieved, but everyone knew that a new era had begun. Samantha's role remains a secret to most, but those who need to know, the board and senior executives, understand that it was she who saved the company from disaster. As Michael quietly left the building he once ran, Samantha remained, ready to lead the company into a new chapter. The long-neglected janitor was now the most powerful person in the company, even without the title of fifth. Samantha's transition into her new role in the company's finance department was not smooth, but she embraced every challenge with passion, a deep understanding of finance, and an eye for detail. She quickly became a key player in the company's recovery. Directors who had been too proud to recognize her value now sought her out, seeking her advice and insight on important financial decisions. The change was dramatic and sparked hope in her. As the company began its restructuring, Samantha was determined to build a culture of transparency and accountability. She held workshops for employees at all levels, emphasizing the importance of work ethic and open communication. These meetings created a space for employees to voice concerns and share ideas, creating an environment where everyone felt they could contribute. Managers who had previously dismissed her now attended her workshops, realizing that their previous attitudes had only fueled the toxic culture that had nearly brought the company to its knees. Meanwhile, Samantha started a mentoring program to support employees from disadvantaged backgrounds. She knew better than anyone what it felt like to be overlooked because of your title or background. Through this program, she mentored younger employees, shared her story, and encouraged them to pursue their ambitions. It was not just about building a better company, but also about building a community where everyone had the opportunity to succeed. Under Samantha's leadership, the company began to thrive. Sales increased, employee morale improved, and customers gradually regained confidence in the brand. The board, who had initially been skeptical of the new direction, became enthusiastic supporters of Samantha's vision. They recognized her ability to look beyond numbers and profits to understand the human element of business, the importance of nurturing relationships, both internal and external. Samantha's reputation grew, and soon she was invited to speak at industry conferences. She shared her views on resilience, the importance of diversity in the workplace, and the lessons she had learned along the way. Her story touched the hearts of many, inspiring them to believe in their own abilities, regardless of their circumstances. When she stood on stage, looking out at the audience full of young professionals, her heart pounded. The admiring gazes from below only made her more steadfast in her mission. She looked back on her journey and realized how far she had come. Despite her success, Samantha remained humble. She often recalled the days of cleaning the office, the laughter of former managers who used to look down on her, and the painful realities of her past. Instead of dwelling on resentment, she chose to focus on gratitude for the opportunity to make a difference, gratitude for the support of her colleagues, and gratitude for the valuable lessons she learned along the way. Her efforts did not go unnoticed. The company received numerous awards for its remarkable transformation, and Samantha was recognized as a leader in the industry. The media called her a success story, and interviews kept coming. But Samantha kept her cool. She used her platform to champion the voices of minorities in the business world, highlighting the need for change and the importance of embracing diversity. She became a role model for many, showing that true success is not measured by titles or awards, but by the impact one can have on others. As the months turned into years, Samatha's leadership style transformed the company into a symbol of hope and resilience. The company is now known for its commitment to ethical values, employee well-being, and community engagement. People no longer see the company as a mere corporation, but as a responsible entity that cares about its employees, customers, and society at large. Yet, amidst the praise and recognition, Samatha never forgot her roots. She still took the time to connect with her employees, listen to their stories, and encourage them to share their aspirations. She understood that everyone in the company, from the janitors to the directors, played an important role in the overall success. Samatha's leadership style was not hierarchical but collaborative and united. Her life outside of work also flourished. She reconnected with her family, spending quality time with her children, who are now grown and pursuing their own dreams. They admired their mother not only for her career achievements but also for her unwavering strength and determination. The whole family often sat down together, looked back on their journey, recognized the hardships they had overcome and the victories they had achieved. Looking back on her life, Samatha realizes that each challenge has shaped who she is today. Those experiences have taught her the importance of perseverance and compassion. She vows to continue making a difference, not only within her company but also in her community. Samatha regularly volunteers at local organizations, using her expertise to help those in need. She understands the value of giving back and wants to ensure that others have the opportunities she once fought for. Ultimately, Samatha's story is not just one of personal triumph, but a legacy of hope and empowerment. She proves that change is possible when one dares to challenge the status quo and believes in their ability to make a difference. As the company continues to grow, Samatha remains a steadfast advocate for equality, justice, and resilience. She went from being an overlooked janitor to a respected leader, inspiring countless people to believe in themselves and their potential. This story is a testament to the power of perseverance, compassion, and overcoming adversity. Have you ever faced a big challenge and found the strength to keep going? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story may inspire and motivate someone who needs encouragement. If you find this story meaningful, don't hesitate to share it with your friends and family to spread the message of determination, resilience, and the opportunity for change. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss out on more inspiring stories like this. Thank you for watching and supporting the channel. Let's build a strong community where people can support each other, no matter how difficult the situation. Wishing you always full of energy and find the strength to rise up in every situation. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe to receive the latest updates. The stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared with the intention of spreading human values in life and have been rewritten with the support of AI. If there are any mistakes, kindly overlook them with understanding.